Hey, here we are again on this journey together.
Yes, love it.
Welcome back to the Whatcha Got Sis podcast, episode number 2. I'm here with my co-host, Cookie J.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome.
Today, I think we have, I don't know if it's a fun topic, but it's a
deep.
good
It's
topic.
It's a hot topic.
We're going to try and delve into privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So hang in there with us, y'all. So Cookie, would you give us a definition of privilege, please?
You know, I have, I guess, a layman's maybe a term that I would use, not necessarily Webster's definition, but I just think of privilege as existing without having to consider exception. So as you apply that to different areas of your life that you may walk around or have privilege in some way or another and not really have to consider being an exception or offering an exception to others.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe also we can think of it around having access that gives entitlement or a sense of entitlement and expectation. If you got access, and you're privileged generally.
Most definitely.
So I think you put it in a really good way. And when I look at it around access, it's privilege when you are maybe blocking, whether intentionally or unintentionally, access for someone else to gain, or you believe you're an exclusive club all on your own. You don't want anybody else there.
Right. That resistance.
Yes. Yes. I would even say that the quote Karen is a personification of privilege, acting like they are a victim.
Oh yeah. The Kens and the Karens. Yes. There's Kens out there too.
Yes. Yes. And from that you can see that people get angry when they have to acknowledge their privilege. They don't want to acknowledge it. That's one of the key problems, because we all probably have some forms of privilege. And if we acknowledge it, we can work on it not being impactful in a negative way to other people.
Yeah, that's the difficult part of this, or the important, really key part of this, is that all of us just inherently, do what we know. And so we don't necessarily think from another person's perspective automatically. But when you become aware, as I say, when you know better, you do better, of how maybe you can be considerate or more thoughtful of someone else in going about your life, or things you do throughout the day, or decisions that you make. Or if someone brings it to your attention, we have to all be willing to make those adjustments. Yes. I call it for the good of the order, if nothing else.
Yes. And I think that privilege plays out in various forms. So we're just going to touch on a few of those forms. I'm just going to throw some out there and you just come back with your thoughts on them. And one of the big ones would be race.
Ooh. Yeah, well, that's an obvious one, but certainly, that is the experience, in going out into the world, not only, the work environment, or just in the grocery store, or any kind of public setting, when you're oftentimes very much aware of your uniqueness in that space. And so, unfortunately, oftentimes there is a difference in how you are treated or greeted, or, that exists, unfortunately.
Yes. Even, I would even say within race, shades of brown.
Yeah, your economic status
Yes.
within your own race.
Yes.
It can be a challenge, or your marital status.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Another form would be gender.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, you and I, with our military backgrounds and
Yes.
the male-dominated field of work, and just our society as a whole, has been historically. I mean,
Yes.
it's changing over the decades, but just being a part of a male, predominantly male, culture in general.
Yes.
And particularly within politics and those sorts of things. And we see how that plays out with decisions that are being made
Yes. Yes.
by men. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, also gender, age, and particularly age.
Yeah, I see that and I recognize it. I think when I was, as it relates to the workforce, in my earlier years in the workforce, I used to supervise people that were, 20 years older than me at the time. And so now it's very much flipped around. But it's a different workspace. Our younger people, or millennials, if you will, they have different needs, and they have different sort of ways of being in the workplace. Like they, don't necessarily want to have, direct oversight. They just kind of want you to
Yes.
give them space and let them do. And that's one, that's important to recognize, those sort of multi-generational challenges in the work environment. But there are differences, and really one isn't necessarily any better than the other, but
Right.
they are differences.
Right. I think what really hones in for me is the sense of entitlement there.
Yeah.
Some come into the workplace with a sense of entitlement and not having proven themselves or shown, worked, done the work. So, I think that there's some forms of privilege there. We could also talk about weight.
Yeah.
Education, I think it's a big one. The college versus non-college, or degree versus non-degree. And, that historically there was significant gap there, and where those with degrees held such privilege that they looked down on those without.
Right.
And I think that you had mentioned before, when we were talking off air, about that seeming to change now, because there are a lot of smart young people coming up, entrepreneurs, and they don't necessarily have a degree.
Yeah. It doesn't carry as much weight, excuse me, as it once did, in terms of individuals. Not to discourage anyone from getting a college degree, but there has, fortunately been, I think, in this age of technology, primarily, a lot of our young people, they get into this tech world, and they build these businesses. AI is just taking over everything. But we have, many young people who, before they turn 21, are already millionaires.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say another one is economic status. And it's nothing wrong with having. Okay, it's nothing wrong with having. The problem comes when you try to block access for others.
Yeah, that's good.
To gain. So, I mean, you have the employment, housing. Housing, I think, is a big one. Renter versus homeowner, or house versus homeless.
Right. Yeah, like they said, the grass ain't always greener on the other side.
Nope.
As a homeowner, I definitely can see some benefits to renting. Although I'm, I feel blessed and privileged. I'll accept that. But I do recognize it doesn't necessarily put me in a better position than some that are renting. They can probably take more vacations than I can. does play out in that arena.
Yeah, I think that sometimes when we see the homeless, privilege plays out when we say, well, we're going to always have homeless, or there's really nothing I can do about it. And when, in fact, if we thought about it, there are things that we all could do to help mitigate that. When you do nothing, it's, to me, it equates to blocking access.
Yeah, and it really points to a systemic problem, because a lot of them are homeless because of the employment situation, or just life circumstances, and some of those areas where individuals exercise their privilege without giving any sort of any sort of willingness to give up anything to allow others to have.
Yeah, exactly. And then I know I just briefly mentioned employment, but when you look at employment, employed versus unemployed, management versus non-management, I certainly have dealt with the management versus non-management, particularly if you start at a low position and work your way up. If you don't consider what it took for you to get there and how you should be mindful of those that are trying to follow that path, you could definitely display your privilege by blocking access and not,
absolutely,
not helping to open the doors for others.
Yeah, absolutely. I am always mindful. One of the things my pastor would often say is, today is them, tomorrow it could be you.
Exactly.
And so any of those areas of life that we walk in privilege, that can change in a moment's notice.
Yeah. Here's a good one. Maybe a little sensitive, but hey, I'm putting it out there.
Go for it.
Church, the hierarchy versus membership, rituals versus Christ-centered purpose, and a big one is which church you belong to. Okay, if you belong to this one over here on this corner, hey, you somebody.
Right.
But if you go to the other one around the corner, down the street,
the smaller one,
yes,
or the that definitely is no exception.
Yeah,
because those same people that we work with and our neighbors and we see in the grocery store, those are all the people that pack in the churches. So everything that happens out in the world can present itself. Those issues and those characteristics can show up inside the church.
Yeah, and I just want to list a few points that I picked up from a presentation made by the Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley, who's the senior pastor of Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay.
And he was speaking on privilege, and here's a few pointers that he listed. Privilege always confuses inconvenience with oppression. It mistakes inconvenience as being oppressed.
Right. Yeah.
Never underestimate the extremes privilege will go through to protect itself. Interesting. And an example of that is, hey, could be, I'm just going to put it out there.
Say it.
When we put in voter ID laws.
There you go. You did it.
When you threaten privilege, it will protect itself. Privilege always has the luxury of waiting and the convenience of time. Oppressed people don't really have the luxury of waiting or the convenience of time.
Right.
Privilege will tell you to be patient. We're doing more research on this or that. Privilege will tell you the wheels of justice turn slowly. Well, if you're not impacted by the justice system, then yeah, you're privileged and you can say it turns slowly. When in fact, if you are impacted by it, it's time for a change. It's gone on too long. something needs to be done now. We see privilege displayed in biblical times as well. In the New Testament, when you think of Jesus and how he confronts the Pharisees on basically being more concerned with holding on to their status than having any concern for those in need. Basically, three things the Pharisees were concerned about: circumcision, dietary laws, and observance of the Sabbath. And then look at or notice what's not on the list.
Right. Nothing having to do with service.
Exactly. Exactly. Feeding the homeless, sheltering the homeless, feeding those who need food, caring for the sick. None of those were on the list of importance to them.
Okay, yeah, I agree with all of those, those references to the Pharisees, because one of the things that I am mindful of, and this is a scripture out of Ephesians 2 verses 8 and 9. And it says, "For by grace," and I just want to really emphasize that, "for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, and not as a result of works, so that no one may boast." And that just, that just preaches itself.
Yes, lest any man should boast.
Anyone should boast, because it is only by God's grace that we are able to experience whatever privileges that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, like today it's them or someone else who is less fortunate, and tomorrow it can be you, or to lose certain individual privileges. But I believe it's so important for us to recognize it for what it is. It's a gift. It's of God. It's His grace, and I just can't even thank Him enough for those privileges. I mean, we can sit here and try to make out a list all day of the things we don't have.
Yes.
But what about the things we do have? What about the things we can do?
Yes.
And it's only by His grace, because you never know, and if you try to walk in somebody else's shoes, what they're going through. You just don't ever know. And we talked about earlier, when someone brings to your attention maybe something you weren't mindful of. If you print something out and it's in a 9 font, you need to be considerate of maybe, elderly individuals or someone who is sight impaired might, appreciate a larger font. And more spacings on the page to read it. Those types of things that we wouldn't just naturally do, but you want to be thoughtful about the things that you do. Again, for the good of the order, for just to have that compassion for others. But anyway, I love that particular
that's good.
Scripture in reference to privilege.
That's good. I would even circle back and say religion has become hypocritical. When the rules, rituals, programs, and keeping your image are more important. Okay. Than really taking time to celebrate the goodness of God and what He has done in someone's life.
I'm telling you, don't take it for granted.
No. So we've discussed how privilege can be displayed.
Yeah.
I think we're coming to the end of our time here. It's been a big topic. There are so much more we can talk about on privilege.
Yes.
So much more. But I would say my closing thoughts would be really to strive to consider how our actions impact others, whether we are looking at it through a measurement of privilege, what we're doing. And if we are causing someone to not have access, we really need to look at that and address that. And I'm hoping that when we look at our privilege in the different forms, and we address that maybe it'll promote some measure of fairness and equity in whatever form it might be. Just being conscious of it and really mindful of what we do and say. How does that impact someone else? Is that our
Yes.
privilege talking, or can we look past that and try to pull someone else up to where we are and not be exclusive?
That part.
You got any closing thoughts on that, Cookie?
No, I think you said it well. I just would like to encourage people to, again, just to be mindful, just to walk about the world being mindful. I think we can do things without thinking sometimes, but just the smallest things can make the biggest difference in someone else's life. And so I just like to encourage people just to stay mindful, stay grateful, thankful for God's grace for today, and hope that if the circumstances, are different in some point, that someone shows you grace in those situations as well.
Yes, that right there. I think that's our time.
Right.
We can wrap this up. I would say blessings to you, but also please be a blessing. And we're out.